The text message from my father arrived 3 days before Thanksgiving, coldly instructing me to stay away because my dirty trucking job would humiliate my brother in front of his wife's ultra-wealthy family. I didn't argue. I simply spent the holiday organizing my logistics fleet from my office, only to receive a panicked phone call from my brother 4 hours into their dinner. His father-in-law had just toasted the mysterious multi-millionaire CEO whose logistics conglomerate had single-handedly saved their manufacturing firm from bankruptcy, and announced my full name to the entire table. My name is Oswald Gibson. To understand how a cruel exclusion from a holiday dinner in Grand Rapids, Michigan transformed into the total unraveling of my family's shallow arrogance, you have to look inside the toxic class-conscious hierarchy enforced by my father, Marcus Gibson. In our family, your worth was measured strictly by your corporate title, the neighborhood you lived in, and how comfortably you could fit into high society country clubs. Marcus was a high-level executive recruiter who spent his career obsessing over executive titles and corporate prestige. My mother, Evelyn, lived in his shadow, conforming entirely to his snobbish worldview. Together, they channeled all their pride and financial backing into my older brother, Julian, an arrogant, image-obsessed corporate finance consultant who treated everyone working in skilled labor or blue-collar industries with subtle contempt. I was always the black sheep. I hated corporate politics and cubicles. From the time I was a teenager, I was fascinated by heavy diesel machinery, supply chain routing, and fleet mechanics. After high school, while Julian went off to an expensive private university funded entirely by Marcus, I chose a different path. I worked night shifts as a freight dispatcher while earning my commercial driver's license and studying industrial logistics management at a local community college. Marcus was mortified. When I bought my first used heavy-duty semi-truck at 21 and began driving long-haul freight across the Midwest, he refused to tell his friends what I did for a living, claiming to neighbors that I was traveling abroad. The divide in our family grew wider 3 years ago when Julian married Vanessa Sterling. Vanessa's family owned Sterling Industrial Materials, a massive multi-state commercial manufacturing corporation based in Detroit, Michigan. The Sterling family occupied the absolute top tier of Michigan's industrial elite, led by Vanessa's sharp, zero-nonsense father, CEO Charles Sterling. To impress the Sterlings, Marcus spent money he didn't have, constantly trying to project an aura of high society status. Julian adopted the exact same persona, regularly making passive-aggressive jabs about my career during rare family gatherings. What my father and brother failed to notice, while looking down their noses at my work boots and oil-stained work jackets, was the sheer scale of what I was building. I didn't stay just an independent truck driver. I bought a second rig, hired a driver, and reinvested every single dollar of profit back into expanding my operational footprint. I negotiated local freight contracts, optimized cross-docking routes, and built an unassailable reputation for zero-delay logistics delivery. By 29, I was the sole owner and managing director of Apex National Freight and Logistics, LLC, a rapidly growing commercial fleet operating 40 heavy-duty semi-tractors, 75 refrigerated trailers, and a massive regional distribution warehouse in Lansing, Michigan. Because I spent my workdays inspecting rigs in the yard wearing work boots, high-visibility vests, and denim, Marcus and Julian assumed I was just a low-level local truck driver eking out a living. I never bothered to correct them. Their arrogance made them blind, and I valued my privacy far too much to crave their superficial validation. Then came the week of Thanksgiving. Julian and Vanessa were hosting a formal 20-guest Thanksgiving dinner at Marcus's lavish lakeside estate in Grand Rapids. The entire Sterling family was attending, including Charles Sterling, his board members, and their executive spouses. 3 days before the holiday, I was finishing a vehicle inspection at my Lansing hub when my phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. I opened the message, expecting a time for dinner. Instead, the text read, "Aswena, I am writing to let you know it's best if you don't come to Thanksgiving dinner this year. Julian is hosting Vanessa's family, and Charles Sterling is a man of extreme prestige. Having a long-haul truck driver sitting at the table in front of high-level executives will embarrass your brother and ruin the image we are presenting. Please make other plans." I stood in the quiet warehouse, holding my phone as cold anger settled in my chest. 5 minutes later, Julian called my phone, not to apologize, but to double down. Look, Asuena, don't take it personally, Julian said carelessly over the speakerphone. Dad is just being realistic. Charles Sterling moves in elite circles. He deals with corporate executives, not blue-collar truck drivers. If he asks what you do and you tell him you drive semi-trucks, it's going to make our whole family look low class. Just stay home. We'll bring you some leftovers later in the week. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't beg for an invitation. Don't worry about leftovers, Julian, I said, my voice dangerously calm. I have plenty to keep me full. I hung up the phone. While Marcus, Julian, and my mother spent Wednesday and Thursday morning frantically decorating the Grand Rapids estate, arranging fine china, and rehearsing their high society anecdotes, I spent Thanksgiving Day doing what I loved, taking care of my business. I paid my long-haul drivers double-time holiday bonuses, personally verified emergency freight dispatches for refrigerated medical supplies, and enjoyed a quiet, peaceful dinner at my office desk in Lansing while reviewing end-of-quarter corporate contracts. What my family didn't know was that 2 weeks prior to Thanksgiving, my firm, Apex National Freight and Logistics LLC, had been engaged in high-level, confidential contract negotiations with Sterling Industrial Materials. Sterling Materials had been on the brink of a massive operational crisis. Their previous regional transport provider had defaulted on delivery schedules, leaving millions of dollars of raw manufacturing components stranded across 3 states. If Sterling Materials couldn't secure a reliable, high-capacity logistics partner by the end of the fourth quarter, their major production plants in Detroit would be forced to shut down, costing them over $40 million in penalty fees. Charles Sterling had personally overseen the emergency logistics vetting process. My firm beat out 3 national competitors because our fleet metrics, safety compliance ratings, and delivery efficiency were completely unmatched in the region. On Tuesday afternoon, the day before my father sent me that insulting text message, I had signed a multi-year, $35 million exclusive freight distribution contract with Sterling Industrial Materials. Sterling Materials had been on the brink of a massive operational crisis. Their previous regional transport provider had defaulted on delivery schedules, leaving millions of dollars of raw manufacturing components stranded across 3 states. If Sterling Materials couldn't secure a reliable, high-capacity logistics partner by the end of the fourth quarter, their major production plants in Detroit would be forced to shut down, costing them over $40 million in penalty fees. Charles Sterling had personally overseen the emergency logistics vetting process. My firm beat out 3 national competitors because our fleet metrics, safety compliance ratings, and delivery efficiency were completely unmatched in the region. On Tuesday afternoon, the day before my father sent me that insulting text message, I had signed a multi-year, $35 million exclusive freight distribution contract with Sterling Industrial Materials. Per my standard corporate protocol, my formal signature on the contract documents was listed under my legal corporate identity, Managing Director Oswa E. Gibson. At 4 o'clock on Thanksgiving afternoon, the formal dinner at my father's Grand Rapids estate was in full swing. 20 guests sat around a massive mahogany dining table, illuminated by crystal chandeliers. Charles Sterling sat at the head of the table, beside Marcus and Julian, sipping expensive vintage wine. Marcus was in peak form, boasting loudly about Julian's corporate finance work and trying desperately to paint the Gibson family as an elite power lineage. Near the end of the main course, Charles Sterling cleared his throat, tapped his silver spoon against his crystal glass, and stood up to address the room. Marcus, Julian, thank you for this exquisite holiday gathering, Charles began, his voice deep and authoritative. Before we move to dessert, I want to share some monumental news regarding the future of Sterling Industrial Materials. Julian sat up straight, beaming with pride, assuming Charles was about to praise him in front of everyone. As many of you know, Charles continued, looking around the table, our manufacturing division faced a devastating supply chain bottleneck this past quarter that threatened our entire supply network. But 48 hours ago, we finalized the most critical contract in our company's history. The table went completely quiet as the executives leaned in. We executed a $35 million master logistics agreement with the most impressive, bulletproof freight conglomerate in the Midwest. The CEO of this logistics giant single-handedly saved our fourth quarter operations. Her operational brilliance, massive fleet authority, and sharp leadership blew my entire board of directors away. Marcus smiled broadly, nodding along. Ah, remarkable. It takes a true corporate titan to manage operations at that level. What is the name of this executive, Charles? Charles smiled, pulling a folded press release from his inner jacket pocket.
Her name is Oswa Gibson. She is the sole owner and CEO of Apex National Freight and Logistics. The entire dining room instantly froze. Marcus's smile shattered on his face. He froze mid-sip, his wine glass hovering inches from his mouth. Julian's face went completely pale, his fork dropping onto his china plate with a loud metallic clatter. My mother, Evelyn, gasped so loudly that several guests turned to look at her in confusion.
Oswa Gibson? Marcus stammered, his voice trembling violently as a cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Did you say Oswa Gibson? Charles looked at Marcus, slightly puzzled by his erratic reaction. Yes, Oswa Gibson. Apex Freight operates 40 heavy-duty rigs out of a massive hub in Lansing. She's an absolute force in the industrial sector. In fact, Marcus, when Julian mentioned your last name was Gibson, I meant to ask, are you by any chance related to her? Marcus sat paralyzed in his chair, completely unable to speak. The blood had drained so thoroughly from his face that he looked like a ghost. Julian tried to stammer out an answer, his jaw working up and down without sound. She is... Before Julian could piece together a coherent sentence, Charles' wife, Victoria Sterling, spoke up from across the table. Wait a minute, Victoria said, looking around the room in confusion. Julian, wasn't your younger sister supposed to be here today? What did you say her name was again? Vanessa, Julian's wife, turned to her husband with wide, horrified eyes as the realization hit her like a freight train. Julian, Vanessa whispered, her voice carrying across the silent table. Is the CEO of Apex Freight your sister? The room descended in a heavy, suffocating silence. Realizing the horrifying truth, Julian frantically reached under the table, pulled out his phone, and dialed my number. In my quiet Lansing office, I was sipping hot tea while reviewing warehouse dispatch schedules for Friday morning when my phone began ringing. It was Julian. I answered on the third ring, putting the call on speakerphone. Hello, Julian? Oswa! Julian shrieked into the phone, his voice laced with absolute panic and background noise. Oswa, where are you right now? I'm at my office in Lansing, managing my trucking company. Why? Oswa, please listen to me. Julian gasped, his voice breaking. Charles Sterling is here. He just toasted you at the dinner table. He said your company just signed a $35 million deal with his corporation. Is that true? Yes, Julian, that's true. We executed the master contract on Tuesday afternoon. Why does that surprise you? In the background of the phone call, I could hear Charles Sterling's booming voice react in shock over the speaker system. Wait, Marcus, you uninvited your own daughter? The CEO who just saved my company because you thought her business was too low class for your table? Oswa, please, Julian begged desperately into the phone. Dad is losing his mind. Charles is furious. Please get in your car right now and drive to Grand Rapids. Come to dinner. We'll save you a seat at the head of the table. I let out a soft, amused laugh that cut through Julian's frantic pleading. I don't think so, Julian, I said, my voice cold, steady, and razor-sharp. You and Dad told me 3 days ago that my dirty trucking job would humiliate the family in front of your wealthy in-laws. You told me I wasn't high-class enough to sit at your table. Oswa, we were wrong. We didn't know. No, Julian, I corrected him firmly. You knew exactly who I was. A hard worker who built something real from the ground up while you two played make-believe with status you didn't own. Enjoy your leftovers. I ended the call, turned my phone on silence, and went back to my tea. The fallout at my father's house was absolute and catastrophic. Charles Sterling was so thoroughly disgusted by Marcus and Julian's snobbery, arrogance, and cruel treatment of their own family member that his entire perception of them vanished in an instant. I built my entire manufacturing fortune on the backs of hard-working truck drivers and industrial labor, Charles announced sternly to the room, standing up from the table. To sit here and listen to you belittle the very woman keeping my factories open because you're obsessed with corporate status is sickening. Charles, his family, and his board members stood up, left their plates on the table, and walked out of the house, bringing the Thanksgiving dinner to an abrupt, embarrassing end. The business fallout was immediate. Charles Sterling stripped Julian's corporate finance firm of all Sterling advisory contracts, citing a severe lack of character and integrity. Within 2 months, without the backing of the Sterling family's corporate network, Julian's standing at his firm collapsed, and he was demoted to a low-level analyst role. Marcus was utterly disgraced among his social peers.
Word of how he had uninvited his multi-millionaire CEO daughter from Thanksgiving because he was embarrassed by her industry spread rapidly through his country club network, making him a laughingstock among the very executives he had tried so hard to impress. Desperate to repair their financial standing and public image, Marcus and Julian showed up at my Lansing logistics hub 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, wearing expensive suits and holding bouquets of flowers, begging for a reconciliation, and asking if I could offer Julian a corporate position at Apex Freight. I met them in the warehouse yard, wearing my work boots, high-visibility vest, and work jacket. I stood surrounded by 40 massive gleaming semi-trucks bearing the Apex National Freight logo. "A swap, please," Marcus whimpered, tears welling in his eyes as he looked around at the colossal operation he had spent years dismissing. "We're your family. We made a terrible mistake. Can't we put this behind us?" I looked at my father and brother with total, unshakable calm. "You didn't make a mistake, Marcus," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the rumble of idling diesel engines. "You showed me exactly who you are. You measure people by their titles, but I measure people by their work. And your credit has expired." I had my yard security team escort them off the property. Over the next 3 years, Apex National Freight and Logistics expanded into one of the premier supply chain powerhouses in the region, operating across 12 states with over 120 rigs. I built a life defined by genuine accomplishment, deep financial strength, and absolute self-reliance. Sitting in my executive suite overlooking my bustling Lansing hub on a quiet autumn afternoon, watching my trucks roll out to deliver goods across the country, I feel a deep, unshakable sense of peace. I proved that real success isn't built on fancy titles or approval from arrogant relatives. It's built on hard work, resilience, and the quiet dignity of doing the job right.
Educational lesson. This narrative illustrates key principles regarding commercial logistics contracts, corporate entity governance, and supply chain liability. Master Services Agreements, MSAs, in supply chain management. High-value commercial freight operations rely on legally binding master services agreements that establish performance metrics, key performance indicators, KPIs, and capacity guarantees. A logistics provider that enters into an exclusive MSA assumes legal liability for timely delivery backed by comprehensive commercial auto and cargo insurance policies. Corporate entity separation and officer authority. A sole owner and managing director of a limited liability company, LLC, operates as an independent legal entity separate from personal or family relationships. Corporate officers possess absolute authority to execute contracts, manage operational assets, and decline employment or business association with individuals regardless of familial ties. Institutional vetting and vendor selection standards. Enterprise-level corporations utilize strict procurement protocols when selecting logistics partners, prioritizing operational capacity, Department of Transportation safety ratings, and financial stability over personal connections or corporate social prestige. Personal advice. If you have been belittled, excluded, or looked down upon by family members who value superficial status over hard work and character, do not waste your energy seeking their validation. Let their arrogance be your fuel to build something real, sustainable, and entirely your own. True success is not measured by the titles you drop at a dinner table, but by the tangible value you create through your own dedication. When you achieve real independence, the opinions of those who once doubted you will no longer carry any weight at all.